Okay, so in this video I'm going to go over photosynthesis. Um, Again, leaves are the major locations of photosynthesis. The green color comes from chlorophyll, which is a pigment in a molecule that is in chloroplast, and that stuff you should already know. And I'm going to go over these three words in the next picture. So stomata is basically like the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, is basically the empty space where the other shit isn't there. Um, a thylakoid is one of these green discs. Yeah, and then a gran a granum is a stack of the thylakoids, so it's a stack of the discs. You could just need to know those three words because they're the most important part of the chloroplast. Um, Stomata allow for gas exchange inside and outside the cell, and there's two membranes. And again, photosynthesis, like cellular respiration, is a redox reaction, which I explained in my last video, so I'm not going to go over this that well. And it's an endergonic process, which means it needs energy to work, and the energy is provided by light, and that's why photosynthesis has photo in it, which means light. So there are only two stages in photosynthesis, the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. So the light reactions happen in the thylakoids, which are those green discs again. They split H2O, release O2, and they produce NADP plus to NADPH. So I discussed these in my last video, but that means basically the H2O splits and releases some electrons. The electrons go to NADP plus, and the electrons join with the NADP plus and make NADPH. And they also generate ATP from ADB in the same process as we saw in cellular respiration to power the Calvin cycle, which is the second part of the cell. And the Calvin cycle, it uses ATP and the NADPH from the light reaction, and it converts a bunch of CO2 into a sugar. Okay, and this is a good sum up. So light and H2 are going to go into the light reaction. It's going to release oxygen. It's going to produce ATP and NADPH. Those are going to help power the Calvin cycle along with CO2. Those three things are going to make your sugars. And these two are going to be converted back to its other forms and go back to the light reaction in a big circle. Woo. This isn't really important. Just know that photosynthesis doesn't happen well in green light because it's going to um, reflect all the green light and absorb none of it. Blah blah blah. Blah blah blah. Here's just a closer look at a chlorophyll molecule. It's green, and when electrons pass through it, Mg is the one that soaks up the electron and gets really excited. Here's a really good picture of the the light reaction. So it's really similar to oxidative phosphorylation and cellular respiration. H2O is going to split up and electrons are going to go through the system in the electron transport chain. Light's going to provide energy for electrons to go through the system, and the electrons are going to keep on traveling until they combine with NAD plus and become NADPH. And at the same time, hydrogen ions are going to be pushed past against their concentration gradient, so from low to high into this thylakoid space, and then they're going to go back outside from high to low, and that's going to release energy, making a bunch of ATP. So the ATP and NADPH are going to go to the Calvin cycle to help power that. Their photosystems are these two things which most of the electron transport chain and reaction happens under. The light harvesting complex transfers the energy of the light to the reaction center, and the reaction center complex helps the electron move through. Here's just a closer look at this stuff. Here's a good picture. It just shows that you're gonna put in energy, the um, the electron's gonna go downhill, which is gonna make some ATP, and you have to push it back up till, and then it gets stored in NADPH. Um, That's just a little comparison, and it's stuff that you guys should already know. There's a like electron transport chain in both. They both use ATP synthase. Um, and again, mitochondria transfer chemical energy to food. Chemical energy to ATP, and chloroplast transform light energy to ATP and chemical energy. And although there's a bunch of similarities, there's differences, and we did this in the free response today, so you should be familiar with them. So basically, um, in the Calvin cycle, which is the second part of photosynthesis, a bunch of CO2 are going to come in, change a bunch of forms, and become sugars, because sugars are a bunch of carbons, right? So all those carbons are going to come from CO2. ATP and NADPH are going to help power that reaction along the way, and you don't need to know the specifics about it, um, but just know that CO2 comes in, ATP and NADPH help make it sugar, and then it's going to go back to its original form where CO2 is going to come in, and it's just a big circle, and it keeps on happening. Rubisco is the enzyme that helps this happen. And as you can see, the Calvin cycle requires ATP, but and sometimes the ATP made by the hydrogen ion stuff in the light reaction isn't enough. So this is another way that ATP can be made. It's just um, basically just electron keeps on traveling around, traveling in a circle, going from low to high and high to low. And when it goes from high to low, that energy released is going to produce ATP. So it's just going to keep on going in a circle. And know that photosynthesis is super important because it makes all our food. And this is a test question that's going to be on there. Miss Sundstrom already went on it, but I'll go over on it just again. They say that uh, the water that's inputted is going to be labeled with a radioactive isotope of oxygen, which means that they can track it, and they track the oxygen, and they say that the oxygen gas released at the end it's the same oxygen because they're both radioactively tagged. And which of the following is the most likely explanation? So in this, we have to remember that in the light reaction, remember I told you that water is split and that releases electrons and um, electrons, and that H2O goes into H and O. So basically, the reason why that H2O, the H2O going in and O2 are the same is because during the light reactions of photosynthesis, water is split, removing electrons and protons, and the oxygen from water is released as oxygen gas.